everyone, welcome back to another edition of Journey to Purpose. Today I have with me the quite inspirational Jake Ostler. He is a founder of the non-profit called International Protection Alliance, and he also works with sexual violence survivors as a therapist. Jacob, that's quite a resume, but welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful to get connected and get to know you, and I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. The first really easy question I ask everybody is, where in the world are you?
I am in the U.S. in a state called Utah. It's pretty close to California. It's inland, and it's winter right now, so we're full of snow.
It sounds wonderful, though I know it can be hard work.
Yeah. It's as long as I don't have to drive in it, I'm usually okay.
Excellent. No, good luck with that. So thank you. So let's start off with your organization. So this is quite, I want to say it's a fairly new one. Is that right?
Yeah, we founded early 2024.
Okay. And what caused you to, what was the reason you founded it, and what sort of need did you see in the community that you're now serving?
Yeah, so I have been I've been working with survivors of sexual violence since about 2016. And I've done that in a variety of capacities with different nonprofits, organizations, volunteer opportunities. And I kind of found a niche that I wanted to fill, that I wanted to work on, and we kind of created this brainchild of International Protection Alliance. We're working internationally with law enforcement to identify sex tourists who go to other countries and then abuse children, and that content is often filmed and sold online, and it's stuff they use to fund their travels, fund their lives, and it's really devastating to the people that it happens to. And my background is not in law enforcement. It's not in investigations. One of my co-founders is, his name's Chad, and he does a lot of our investigation side. And then I focus mostly on the after part of how do we help people heal? How do we get them the resources they need? What does life look like after this? How do we get the videos of them that are online taken down? All this kind of stuff. And so that's where we started. That's where we are. We just actually opened an office in Malaysia. So we spent last year mostly fundraising to kind of build up our programs. And then we're starting implementing the mission this year. We did some small individual survivor related impact things last year, but this year is when we're really hoping to see our mission grow. And so, yeah, if you're ever in Malaysia and Kuala Lumpur, we'd love to have you. Love to have you pop by the office.
It's a great part of the world. I haven't been, this is how I know I'm getting old. I haven't been for 20 years. I need to go back. There we go.
Okay.
I have a reason to.
Okay. Next time, shoot me a message.
Absolutely.
We'd love to host you.
Thank you. How big is the problem though? So we hear about it a lot. I also see a lot of conspiracy theory stuff online, which I try to ignore. But from what you're seeing and what you're dealing with, what is the scale that you're aware of these horrible things taking place?
Yeah. So for me, I look at this from a couple different lenses. I look at it from what's verifiable, right? We'll have areas where we say trafficking is super common. In like the US, for example, some states are like, we see a ton of trafficking here, and some states are like, we don't. But that can also be an ability to identify an issue, where one state can be extremely good at identifying trafficking and prosecuting it and working those cases, and another state may not be. Like those metrics sometimes don't balance on that note. But with like survivors of trafficking I work with as a therapist in Utah, most of the people that I work with were trafficked by family members or boyfriends. They weren't, it wasn't a giant conspiracy theory thing. It wasn't like this major draw. It was an aunt, an uncle, a parent, a stepdad, something like that, or a boyfriend dated somebody with the intention to traffic them. These are a lot of what we see. And then we see a lot of international kind of recruitment tactics where people are recruited to go for a job abroad. And we see people that are told, hey, this kind of stuff that like we need someone to work a hotel job here or a hospitality job or some other kind of like cook or cleaner. And they talk about salaries, benefits, and they'll go as far to connect them with people who say, I went and I worked and it was great and I had a great experience. And the people get on the plane, they get there, their documents are taken, and then they're put in a debt bondage situation. Mm-hmm. And then they're trying to work their way out of a debt for a contract they didn't understand that's growing and growing and growing. And then they're told, oh, well, if you can't make that money doing the labor at the hotel at the front desk, you may have to start having sex with customers to start to fill that. And it's a large part of a grooming process. The problem is massive, and I mean, if you look at just sexual abuse, we see sexual abuse is occurring everywhere. And trafficking is essentially the monetization of sexual abuse is what it is. It's instead of saying, you know what, someone's going to go and sexually abuse somebody, someone with somebody they have power over is like, I can get someone who wants to sexually abuse somebody to do this and pay me. And so
Mm.
the problem, like, it exists everywhere, and there's also people that are working on it everywhere. So I think the problem is massive, and there's lots of ways to understand it in your local areas. And I talk a lot, so if you want to interrupt me, interrupt me. um, but the internet has really made this also a really big global phenomenon where now if someone wants to abuse somebody, film it, they can sell that online. And this is a dark web problem. This also happens on normal internet sites on Facebook, Instagram, X, all these other places, through apps like Kick, through Telegram, through all these other apps that are used. It's not just this dark illegal part of the internet. It's the part of the internet our kids are on, that they just exist on and that we bring into our homes. And it's a scary thing when you give a kid a phone, you're not just giving them access to the world, you're giving the world access to your child.
Yeah.
And it's a big problem.
Now that I mean, it's these things are hard to quantify, aren't they? So I guess is the problem more a case of, I'm going to be sort of quite generic here, but Western people going to Eastern countries and
Mhm.
exploiting the different systems, the different. I always put it in terms of respect for life. It's not that people in other countries don't agree with it, but because often in poorer standards of living, money is a bigger deal, and
Yeah.
so you will do more for that money, or you will take the
Mhm.
chance that you might not take, like you and I might not have ever considered taking, because we have a more comfortable standard. So
Yeah.
is that a big part of the problem, or do you see as much of this trafficking happen within the US or the Europe as you do in the Eastern countries?
Yeah. I think these are just my thoughts, right? There's people that know more than me that may have different thoughts, and this is kind of my experiences. I think people with the money to go and travel abroad and abuse people, I think they do that. I think we see a lot of people that are like if someone is going to sexually abuse their neighbor, that neighbor can grow up, they know their name, they know their family, they can report them anytime for the rest of their life. If someone goes to a country that's far away and doesn't give any identifying information and then goes home, they're much less likely to get reported, caught. Transnational prosecutions can be really difficult. Working with survivors abroad, where they're like, well, my abuser already left the country and I still am just in a desperate situation where I'm
Hmm.
trying to find my food, trying to find work, all this other stuff, they're less likely to go, hey, I need to work with federal international law enforcement to prosecute this person. And so I see a lot of that. And I also think, like, what people want, people are tailoring to, right? Like countries with really high restrictions where sexual promiscuity may be punishable by law, people travel internationally to do that kind of stuff. And there's like in Bangkok, there's brothel systems that are tailored for specific ethnicities, races, nationalities that like I couldn't get into as a white man, and there's others that are catered to white people that other people can't get into, and those are just kind of how it goes. And there's countries that may not be equipped to identify and prosecute things like online activity, which is one of the reasons that we on at International Protection Alliance focus a lot on training law enforcement on identifying these cases, how to gather evidence, how to identify IP addresses, how to identify people who are being abused, who are actively abusing, how to identify all this stuff and build it into a legal case so that it can be prosecuted.
Hmm.
Um, because a lot of the information's there. It's already online. It exists. It's just building cases against people that are already doing this,
So so
that aren't super hiding it.
So I guess part of it is the education of like how you find these people for the law
Mhm.
enforcement abroad, as you say. Do you have to educate, or is there a culture gap in terms of? I know in the UK we have this thing of victim blaming, right? So if a
Yeah.
sexual event happens, what were you wearing? And we all know like logically that the clothes don't make a difference. The circumstances, like this is a predator versus a victim. But I guess do you have that same challenge to overcome with your education that you're providing to law enforcement in other countries as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, and in the US still, even like even here in Utah, Utah has a really high rate of sexual abuse compared to other violent crimes in Utah. And that's something we deal with. I think there's people that look at it and they go, okay, this is clearly a victim. This person was 5 years old. The person that abused them was 40. There's no way this was consensual, right? And then there's people
Hmm.
that are like, this person was 30. They had a little bit of alcohol. This person had a little bit of alcohol, and this happened. And then there's like a whole gap between it. And I think people are like, these ones are really easy to identify as victims. Um, and older people are harder, right? Even here in Utah, one of the things we see is people that go and traffic individuals, they'll recruit women who are living on the street who are already addicted to drugs, and they'll start giving them drugs for free. And then
Right.
they'll start to get them hooked, get them dependent. They bring them into their home, and then they go, okay, now I'm going to withhold drugs. And if you want these drugs, now you have to do this to this guy. And then they get them dependent, and then they're built like, then they're manipulating them and forcing them into a sexual relationship for drugs. Um, but you'll go and you'll hear those cases, and people will go, oh, that sounds like a druggie who just wanted drugs. And
Right.
it's
Yeah.
like, actually, that's a trafficking case. Like, that's exactly what that is. And so we get a lot of education stuff that happens everywhere, and a lot of cultural things, how sex is treated in different cultures, how consent is treated in different cultures. It matters. um
Absolutely.
and
It,
yeah.
I was going to say, it's interesting from a sort of looking at the vulnerability of people. So there's um, a chap in the UK. He's called Darren Brown. He did a
Hmm.
series. This was years ago now, pre-COVID, so I can't tell you when because everything blurs. But it was How to Kill a Man in 24 Hours. And he does a lot of NLP, hypnotherapy, that kind of persuasive work. But his whole point was to show that you can take a vulnerable person and in a very short period of time, essentially make them do things that they wouldn't naturally do
Yeah.
had you not exploited them. And in 24 hours, I think he got four people, three of them, he got to push someone off the roof of a building. And it was incremental. It was little things of renaming vegetarian food, no, non-vegetarian food as vegetarian. Like, no one will matter. It doesn't matter, and just building up to kick this person to do that. And I really hope those people got a lot of therapy after that series. But his whole
Hmm.
thing was, this is how easy it is if you have a vulnerable person to further exploit them. And although it was all staged and obviously no one got killed, but the people at the time didn't know that, it was someone in authority, someone with power, someone with persuasive nature, and someone who's vulnerable. And that's where I guess, your drug addicts, your poverty, the challenges, trying to get
Yeah.
away. These are all vulnerable people who are put into situations they wouldn't normally do were they not so vulnerable.
Yeah. When people tell me they want to work with survivors of trafficking, usually the first place I refer them is places that work with people experiencing homelessness. In the US, there's studies that you can go read, and they talk about how if you're a female and you're homeless, or if you're a teenager living on the street, it takes between 24 and 72 hours for a trafficker to approach you on average.
Wow.
Um, and that's been pretty standardly repeated over time. And that's where the like conspiracy trafficking, if you look at it from trafficking, is essentially, it's a business. People are trying to make money. If, for example, if like Americans are like, oh, if I go to this country, I might get trafficked. And it's, in reality, if you're an American and you go somewhere and you go missing, that's international news. Their country's pressured to look for you. Like, they want to keep their country safe. You get travel advisories for that country. It is not a smart business decision to do that to an American tourist. If you have someone who's already living on the street that nobody's looking for and has nowhere to
Mm,
live and is in a desperate situation, that's the person that gets chosen. If you have a young kid who's vulnerable and can't report, people that experience disabilities, like people that are mute and can't talk, or people that are paraplegic or don't have the brain functionality, that have learning disabilities and their brains are really young, like those people get exploited at an incredibly high rate because of lack of reporting and understanding. So if whenever people talk about vulnerabilities like that, absolutely, those matter.
mm.
Immigration status matters. Your access to food and housing and basic needs matter. Your access to human connections matter, right? I've worked with survivors that told me their trafficker was the first person to give them a birthday cake. It was the first person to make them feel special, to make them feel happy, and they were told they were beautiful for the first time. It's just it's a it's a really intense grooming process, and that's what it is. It is a grooming process.
Mm.
It's not usually like a 2 hour thing. It's often a long thing.
Well, how and why did you get into this line of, I'm going to call it work, but it's more of a calling, really, because you can't do this just for a
Yeah.
job, right? Like, what
Yeah.
made you choose this?
And so this is not anything that if you would have asked me for the first 20 years of my life that I would have thought I'd be on. My whole family on both sides of my family is in like business, marketing, finance, real estate. That's all of my siblings, cousins, uncles, grandparents, that's the family I come from. So it's very out of the norm that I would become a therapist and work with survivors of violence. It's just not what I grew up thinking I would do. But while I was in my undergraduate program, the Me Too movement happened. And that
Mm-hmm.
was, if anyone doesn't know, it was where people started posting about instances of sexual violence that they experienced with the hashtag Me Too. And they started sharing about it. And it became really prevalent. It became social media news globally. It was really incredible. And I was pretty blown away by it. It's nothing I'd been exposed to before. It was nothing anyone in my life really talked about. And I just started researching it. I went through different studies. I started asking people. I'd ask people that I knew at university and ask them, "Hey, I've been studying this. Are you okay if I ask you questions about it? Can I ask you personal questions?" And a lot of the women I knew said yes, and I would ask them about their experiences with consent, with sexual violence and other things like that, and they would share them with me. And I kind of had my worldview rocked for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
I considered, like, I thought the world was overall safe. I grew up in a pretty privileged background, and it was just what I knew. And then I was kind of thrown a loop, and I was like, okay, this is wild. Like, even at the university I attended, people would tell me about abuse that occurred at the university, and I was like, this is pretty different from what I thought I knew about the world. And so I started studying psychology. I started focusing my classes, my coursework on this subject. I started studying things like the overlap between pornography and trafficking. I started studying things like sexual violence prevalence, reporting, survivors interacting with the justice system, how the justice system works, global perspectives on it. And I got my first job working at it was a residential home for boys, and the boys had been sexually abused and then started to exhibit grooming behaviors with other children. And then they ended up at this facility. And I didn't know it at the time, but that's the first time I started working with survivors of trafficking. I just didn't have the language to know what they were telling me was trafficking. And then I started to learn that not only was sexual abuse kind of everywhere, and we've known that as a people forever, but that people were sexually abused for money. And that blew my mind a lot. And I kind of started down that road and started studying. I did an internship in Ghana for a summer where I worked with survivors of trafficking in Ghana. A lot of girls that were forced into child marriages, and then a lot of boys who were trafficked on the fishing industry. And a lot of them were sexually abused while they were forced to fish. And like when people think, oh, they were trafficked on the fishing industry, they'll think like, oh, they're standing there, they're fishing, they have to meet a quota. But it's also things like the net's stuck on the boat and they throw a boy in, and if the boy can't untangle it, he drowns under the boat. They're working and fishing 20-hour days. They're pulled out of school for this. A piece of the money that the business makes, they send back to the families, so the families think that their teenage boy has a legitimate fishing job, and they
Mm-hmm.
think they're being provided for. And then I started working more internationally. I focused a lot on Southeast Asia, and then I started working as a therapist with survivors of torture and other types of abuse in Utah. And it just kind of started growing. I did a certificate program for anti-trafficking at Vanguard University, which was great. And I just kind of kept going, and I've just landed here. It's not something I've tried to change. It's something I'm pretty content working in this space right now. That could change someday, but right now I feel great about it. I like where I'm at. I like what I'm doing, and I'm a downer to listen to sometimes, but the highs of my job are incredible. Like they really are. I see
I mean,
like yeah, yeah.
at the downer part, so I've worked with law enforcement and I was in the army as well, and I know people who've worked in child exploitation, and they have to rotate out and they have to go through therapy themselves because of what they're seeing, what they're processing. So I was
Mhm.
going to say, like, how do you protect yourself from that? Because you can't not take some of it in. I don't think,
Yeah.
as you know, as someone who's already had this awakening to the darker side of part of the world and has chose to go down that path. How do you protect yourself so you can still do your job and not let it get to you?
Yeah. I would say I've focused a lot on self care and sustainability. And I also know that my brain works for this. And I'll give you an example. Like my brain, if I wanted to work with hospice care, my brain couldn't handle it. I think hospice workers are incredible. They're working with a constantly dying, grieving population, and that's the job, is to help people
Mm.
pass away in the most painless way possible. I think that would destroy my brain to work with a constantly overturning and dying population. Um, my brain works for this one. I also I get concerned if people say, "Hey, I do this and it doesn't affect me." I'm like, I just think you haven't identified how yet. Like if
Hmm.
like I hear a new story of sexual abuse almost every day, and that's been the case for probably 8, 9 years. How can that not affect you? Like, how can that not affect your worldview, what you think about, right? Like everywhere I go, whether it's like a church, a beach, a scout camp, the wilderness, a business, my social media. I'm like, I know someone who I open Instagram and I'm like, oh, I know someone who was abused and exploited on Instagram. I go to the woods and I'm like, oh, I know someone who was abused in the woods. I'm
Mm.
like, oh, I'm going to go to like these countries that I love. And I'm like, oh, I know people who are abused in these countries that I love. It's not like your brain connects it and it doesn't just go away. I have a therapist that I think is great. She works specifically with other therapists and then first responders. It's her whole clientele, and she's awesome. And she checks me for PTSD symptoms. Working with populations that I do, you can develop every symptom of PTSD, and
Hmm.
so like it's important to check yourself. I've got a great wife who also puts me in check, and she's like, "Hey, you should go on a walk, like, or you should go to the gym, or you should do something today because you're you're low." And she's understanding of when I'm low, and she's also great, and she experiences really hard stuff. She's a labor and delivery nurse,
Oh, wow.
and she sees the best stuff. She also is a part of people's worst day if they lose a baby. That's like she deals with incredibly hard stuff. And we're very careful about not venting all the time about the terrible parts of our jobs because we both have some hard stuff and it's not what we want our home life to be. So I also don't make it my whole home life, my whole personality. There's people that have hung out with me for a long time before they figure out this is what I do. Um, and there's also just a variety of people that are, some are really interested and some are like, this is not my jam to talk about. And I,
Hmm.
as a person, respect that, right?
Yeah.
Like, not everyone, like, my work is not often the round table, dinner table conversation. It's just not like, um,
I mean, maybe
and
it
so,
should be. Maybe that's the problem, that we're not acknowledging it happens so much. I don't know. I mean, I don't have the
yeah,
answers, but yeah.
I think it's healthy on occasion, but like, if every time I walked into a social net, everyone was like, I'm going to hear stories about sexual abuse today, like people would
Probably
stop
is a bit
inviting me to
much.
social
Yeah,
events.
yeah, yeah. That's fair.
So, um, so like I make myself available and I share about it, but I am mindful that it's not everybody's thing. And I also like people think when we look at it, we're like, he works with survivors of trafficking, and people think of really far away stuff. Like I know people that are a 5 minute drive from my house that were
Hmm.
survivors of trafficking. It's not like it's I don't know if the person that I'm talking to at the random meeting or place I'm at, I don't know what their history is with sexual violence. I don't know what they're dealing with. I don't know like what's really triggering for them and what that brings up. And so I err on the side of caution. And if people want to talk about it, I do. And if they don't, I'm going to kind of pull that away, which is one of the reasons I like podcasts and stuff like this or education events is I know my audience wants to talk about it.
Yeah. The other thing I found really interesting and really refreshing with what you've said is, the Me Too movement. You're like, holy shit, what's
Yeah.
going on here? Um, but
I
I
also,
love,
yeah, good, I'm clear to swear on your podcast.
yeah,
I meant to ask
yeah,
that before that I didn't. Okay, good.
yeah, yeah. Remember, I was in the army. Anything goes. We tried to keep it
Yeah.
not too bad, but still.
Okay,
Um,
perfect.
but I've had similar conversations with some of my male friends who again are great people. I love them dearly, but they had no clue the fact that I don't know a single woman who hasn't been assaulted, groped and it's not like a trafficking sexual abuse level. Sometimes it's just like not feeling safe.
Yeah.
And I find I think there's people who still deny this happens, and also it happens to men as well. Let's acknowledge
Yeah.
that. Do you get people who kind of go to you like it can't be that big a problem, like you're making it all up? Do you get people who basically don't believe that this is a problem?
I think I get more people that will look at it and go, I don't think the problem's as big of a deal as people say it is. A lot of people acknowledge it happens, but just not in my community. That's pretty common where people are like, oh, like, yeah, I know it happens. Like, I want to go and help. Like, people are like, oh, I need to jump on a plane and go to this country where we know trafficking happens. And I'm like, it actually probably is happening in your city, like maybe in your neighborhood. Like, it's not something that far off. And one of my favorite kind of things to refer people to look at is there's a traveling museum. I don't know how often it runs or where it is, but it's essentially items of clothing that people were abused in.
Oh, yeah, I know
And
about this.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, and the whole premise is it really didn't matter
Yeah.
what they were wearing.
Absolutely. I mean,
Like it has everything from
sobering.
military uniforms to like toddlers onesies and everything in between. And it's just like, no, this is not a fashion problem. It's not. Like, and to
No.
say that the fashion industry is accountable for sexual abuse is wild to me, that that's still like something that people just accept. Um,
I, I think it's the same thing, and we had it on a British talk show recently. There's a guy called Graham Norton. Don't know if you heard of him. He's Irish. He has a wonderful talk show in the
yeah,
UK. There was actually an Irish actress and three other actors, and they were talking about how they've been taught in their training for like the film fighting, to get your phone out and ram it up here, and how silly that was. And the men are laughing, and this woman goes, "Well, that's what every woman has to do, right? That's what we have to do every day." And it sort of that awkward silence of, "Oh yeah, there's a whole other world out there that happens in our own
yeah,
backyards." I think maybe it's that foolish optimism, isn't it? Of like, well, of course it doesn't happen here because I know him and I know her, and they're all lovely people, and of course everyone's lovely people. That, like you say, it can happen anywhere, and I
yeah,
don't know whether we need to have those honest conversations more to
yeah.
make people realize it does happen in your backyard.
Yeah. And I think honest conversations are great. I think context appropriate matters, or like situation appropriate matters.
Yeah.
Um, and I will say there's a quote I love, and it's we walk on the same dirt, but we live in different worlds. And it was given to me in a global women's studies class. And we were talking about the professor she had men go and just say, hey, if you're at the grocery store and you're like walking out to your car, what do you do? And I'm like, she's like, it's 9 p.m. There's two cars in the parking lot. What do you do? I'm like, I go to my car. Like, I get in my car. And I probably glance at the other car and go, oh, sweet car or lame car. Like, that's it. And then they had a couple of the women share, and they were like, well, I stop and I kind of look around and I see if anyone's leaving at the same time, and if there's other women walking out at the same time, I'll try to pace myself with them. If there's a car parked next to my car, I may ask someone to walk me to my car from the store. And they gave all this stuff. They're like, I only unlock my driver's door and I put my groceries in through the driver's door on the passenger seat. Like, and I was just, it was really like wild to me just how much it was about safety. And
Mm.
I started looking at stuff and just kind of noticing in my own life. Um, I like late night walks. I like to hike by myself with my dog. But like, if you're a female solo hiking in Utah and you turn the corner and I'm walking up in sweats and a hoodie, and like, I mean, sometimes my beard's like a
Fair
lot
old
bigger
man.
than this. Yeah, and I turn the corner and I'm like, oh, like I've started noticing how do people feel, and often I'll take out my phone and like fake a phone call and start talking, like, and just be like, hey babe, how are you? Like, I'm just hiking, and like fake talk to my wife or something. Like, I cross the street a lot. I noticed that women would cross the street if I was walking at like 9 or 10 at night, and so I just started taking the initiative and just crossing the street myself. And I've just noticed, and there's times I may have done that, and they've been like, "That's dumb," or that wasn't helpful. And I don't know, but I try to do my best at it, and it just is what it is. And I look at it, and in my therapy with survivors of trafficking, that's also something, or sexual abuse at all, is something that I see. When I tell people I do this kind of work, they're like, oh, great. And then they'll ask me different questions. But for clients, a lot of times I work with a lot of female clients. And depending on the client and what they're comfortable with and what they want out of therapy, one, they may just not see me because I'm a male. And I respect that. And I help them find a good female therapist. I don't have to be everyone's therapist. It's
Hmm.
not my job. I also have clients that see me virtually exclusively. They like that there's a computer between us. They like that they're not alone in a room with a guy. They don't want to be in a therapy office. Like, I've worked with kids who were abused by their therapists. There's therapists that practice here in Utah that you can read reports on their profile about how they've had sexual relationships with clients in their office. And it's like, for them, it's a safety thing. And my job is not to be like, no, you have to come into my office and I'm
Mm.
safe. Like, I'm not going to hurt you. Come to like, that's not the narrative. The narrative is, okay, how can I best help my client? And if doing that virtually, or meeting them virtually, or meeting them at a public place is what they want to do, that's what I look at and that's what I do. right? That's everyone's in a different spot. And I also have to understand that my gender matters especially in this issue. Like me just being a therapist is not enough. It doesn't make me safe. It doesn't make me a good guy. I have to be to meet my clients where they are and treat them in a way that's healing for them.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And you're right. But also I think it is important to have people like you who are also male doing this, because it isn't all people, but
Mm-hmm.
it isn't all men and everything else. We have to have those positive role models to break that cycle, to break that belief that any person is a predator, any person's going to do me harm, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's good that you can, and I
Yeah.
love that you respect the different needs of all your clients, which is
Yeah.
obviously the right thing to do.
Can I tell you a story about that actually?
Please do.
Um, I had a client who I'd seen her virtually for probably a year. And in a session, she said she wanted to try doing an in person session just so that she could experience being in the same room as a guy. That's all she wanted was to work on that. Because in her own life, like at work or at other places she would go, occasionally she'd be kind of isolated with a male. And she was like, I feel really uncomfortable. And she'd worked with me enough. She felt like, okay, I want to see how this goes. And so we made a plan. We talked about it. We were like, okay, I was like, I will leave the door to my office open. I will walk in first and I will sit in a chair. You can sit in the chair closest to the office. When you walk in, I'll sit down and you can kind of scan the office, scan the room, sit down if you're comfortable. If you want to just walk out, just so that you regain that feeling of control of I can leave if I want to, then let's do that. And so we did. And I sat there and she kind of surveyed the office. She walked out, she came in, she eventually shut the door. And then that's what we worked on that session was, what does this bring up for you? What are you feeling? What are you experiencing? Is it overwhelming or is it a healthy amount of anxiety? Right? Like, because the goal wasn't not for her to do something hard. It was to be able to help her have a good experience. And so that she could start to process that she could um, feel more safe in situations where men were present. Um, and that's what we did. And it ended up really well. And we saw each other in person on occasion a couple more times. Um, but it was a really interesting thing to do therapeutically. As a therapist, it was just like, okay, my job is just to be in the room and help you process the emotions of being around a guy. Like that was the whole therapy session. And after that, like, I mean, she was really excited about it after. Like, we did another session and she talked about it and she talked about how brave she felt and about how in control she felt. And it was just, and this woman was older. Um, she had been dealing with this for decades of just
Yeah.
never having an experience like this. And then she was like, hey, like, let's go for it. And we did. And I share that because if I had sat there and said, you know what, no, you have to see me in person, we could never have had an experience like that. And she would have chosen a different therapist, and rightfully so.
Yeah. But
But
it goes back to the therapeutic alliance being so
mhm,
important with whatever you have. I had
100%.
similar thing with someone who couldn't even. I do a lot of online therapy, and I had someone who couldn't even come to a Zoom call because their anxiety was so hard. So we just
Yeah.
WhatsApped for like, well, she's actually in the US. We WhatsApped for like 3-4 months, voice notes, messages until she was ready to get on a Zoom call. And then same as you, what emotions are you going through right now? How can we deal with it? And when I do get frustrated with other therapists is when I have clients who've come from other therapists, and because therapists haven't met the client where they are, they've gone, no, this is how I operate, this is what you must do, you must do these things. And
Yeah.
of course you're right away putting back that relationship and putting back that trust, and
Hmm.
it doesn't take a lot to do these steps, as you've just shown.
Yeah. 100%. 100%.
With the sexual with the trafficking that you see locally, I guess for people listening, what things should they look out for that could be indication of trafficking in your local area that people might not think of?
Yeah, these are indicators, not surefire things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these are things that I'd look at as red flags that are like, hey, I would look into this. Because like people, for example, they'll say, oh, I walked out and there was a towel wrapped around my car and I think someone, or like my windshield, and someone was going to kidnap me while I took it off and traffic me. And I'm like, that's probably not what was going to happen. That's usually not how trafficking occurs, right? Um, like kidnapping, especially of like adults at a gas station. It's not the trafficking norm. It gets a lot of media attention, builds cases really fast. It's just not the most common stuff we see. Um, These are things, if you see this kind of stuff, to look at and say, what is going on here? Let's look at this a little more. If someone doesn't have control of their documents is a big one. If they've come to a country and they're like, oh, my employer actually has all my documents, that's a big one. Right? Like, I don't get a job and then give my employer my passport, my driver's license, and then live in a room with 10 other employees. Like, that's not a normal job requirement. That's a pretty big indicator. Like sexual behaviors in young children, that are not super age appropriate, right? Because we develop, like, we have our stages of development that we typically grow through. But when you go through sexual abuse at a really young age, you start to try to process sexual behaviors at a young age. And you'll see different sexual activity occur at a really young age. Untreated medical issues in areas where with people that should be able to get them treated, like lacerations, big bruises, broken bones. Medical care is not a priority for people who are being trafficked, right? Really young pregnancies. I would, if depending on like advertisements you see on websites you're on, any kind of stuff, like people go on internet sites like Facebook or Craigslist and just say, hey, I'm going and I really want to date a mom with a daughter. And it's like, okay, like that's kind of a red flag like that. Like, why do you want to date someone that has just a daughter? Like, why are you looking for the daughter? It's not usually like people don't go, hey, I want to date someone. And you know what I'd love is a mom with a young daughter. Like, that's just not super normal. But traffickers will see that and go, like, I know what you're asking for. And then there's a lot of different lists you can look up that people have put out for signs of trafficking and awareness. And there's stuff like locks being on the wrong side of doors, frequent male visitors to a location that doesn't make sense, right? Like if you have two parents with a young kid and there's just a ton of men walking in and out of there all the time, like that's odd. Child influencers that are wearing kind of more promiscuous but not illegal content on stuff like Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all that kind of stuff. It's like, oh, why is the parent pushing out all this content with their 6 or 7 or 8 year old in really weird clothing in weird positions? Like, what's going on here? Like, that all is stuff worth looking at. And then another one that I'll tell people is if you're asking somebody questions and they look to somebody else as an authority figure to answer basic questions like, what's your name? And they look up. Where do you live? And they look up, and someone else is answering all the questions. Like, that's a concern. And those, not any of those things individually mean that someone's being trafficked or that they're being sexually abused, but those are things that are like, this is worth looking into and seeing what's going on. Then behavioral issues. We used to look at children that were misbehaving and say, what's wrong with you? And I like to frame that as kind of what's going on with you. Like, what are you experiencing? What are you communicating? Especially young kids, we try to communicate what's going on with us, but kids don't have the language to communicate what's going on. So someone like a young kid who doesn't know how to say, this person's hurting me in this way and I need help, may act out by bullying, being angry, not doing their schoolwork, fighting, isolating, young drug use, all this kind of stuff can show up. And so if you have kids that are acting out, and it's one of the reasons that teachers are incredible at reporting and understanding these kind of issues, is they're often who gets told about it, right? When we teach consent education and in schools, we give kids the language to say, that's happening to me, right? Where they can be in a class and say, oh, I have the words to tell you that my uncle is touching me in this way and I don't like it. And that's bad. Versus a kid who's just like, my uncle makes me play a game and I don't like it. And they're just sitting there and they just think it's a normal game. And then they get taught, actually, this is not okay. And these are adults you can tell. And when you tell an adult, don't just tell one, tell like three, or tell an adult until someone helps you. Those are things that I think are really important when we look at signs and other things. And yeah, teachers and nurses and doctors and client facing staff are incredible.
Absolutely. And would you recommend, if someone sees something they think is a bit off, not sure how to follow up? Like you said, it could just be a weird thing or it could be something bigger. Should they call the police? Should they call a doctor's surgery? Where would you, I know it's different by countries, but where would you recommend people go as a starting point just to have that sanity check?
The first thing, if you suspect human trafficking, I would look up and I assume your audience is not all UK, but wherever you are, I would look at your country's your human trafficking reporting hotline. So we have one in the US, and if you report to it, then that hotline takes the information you give and then gives it to practitioners in your state that can do something with that, that are trained in that. A lot of countries have a human trafficking hotline. Government is who I would look at. And then you can also call nonprofits and let them know, hey, I'm seeing this. Do you know where I should go? And they'll be acquainted with your resources. Nonprofits are not like, they're usually not kind of reporting agencies. And what I mean by that is nonprofits don't have the authority to go into a home and say, hey, this kid's being trafficked. I'm going to take the kid out and keep them safe, right? Nonprofits, that's not part of their designation. That's illegal. That's kidnapping. That's law enforcement and government's job. And so if someone's being trafficked in an unsafe situation, for there to be government protections, the government needs to be involved in some capacity. And different countries handle that differently. So also understand that based on where you live and what that looks like. The US has a visa for people who are trafficked here specifically. That exists in some countries. It doesn't in other countries. Other countries, some places deport you. And they're like, hey, you were trafficked. Like, you're going to stay in a detention facility here for X amount of weeks and then you're shipped back home. And that's what happens. And there's a variety of responses, but I would look at that and I would consult, like I would Google signs of trafficking in this kind of area, and reach out to professionals in your network. They usually, like, local professionals will want to help. They will, and they'll have places to refer you, and they can also talk you off a ledge if it's not, or they'll say, hey, this is 100% worth looking at. Like if someone called me and said, hey, my neighbor has a young kid and like a ton of single men come over all the time and she's not at home when the kid's home, I'd be like, okay, like this is definitely something we should look at. Like this is not normal. So that's where I'd recommend is find out if you have a anti-trafficking hotline where you can report abuse and report that kind of stuff. And then I would contact your own local anti-trafficking agencies and say, hey, if I don't know where to report this, where do I go? And they'll help coordinate where to go from there.
Brilliant, thank you. And if people want to get in contact with you or support your foundation, how can they do that?
Yeah, we love support. So there's a lot of free ways. You can follow us on our socials. If you go to our website, www.protectall.org, you can go there. You can find we're on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and you can go and follow us on those. And then subscribe to our newsletter. We send updates about what we're doing and other things. There's always, nonprofits always need donations. So that's always a thing. We right now are fundraising. We have a group of survivors coming in from Latin America to testify against some Americans who went and abused them in court cases later on this year. So we're currently fundraising for that. If that's something you're interested in, please let me know. And we're looking for things like the money goes towards things like flights, hotels, transportation, food, all this kind of stuff. They're coming in groups. And, that's a really, one of the reasons we do that is, one, it helps the survivor to be able to see justice work, but also it prevents future victimization, because if people that are doing this are put in jail, they lose access to that vulnerable population they had before. And it's a really good form of prevention. And so we have stuff like that. We're building, like, you can subscribe to be a monthly donor. That's always super helpful. It helps us project programs and funding and other things like that. And if you want us to come speak at anything or come talk to you, we have a group of speakers that do that locally, internationally, and we provide training, consultation. We speak at corporate events. We speak in schools. We speak in podcasts, all that kind of stuff. And right, there's me who has a aftercare kind of victim services background, and then one of my other co-presenters, he has a law enforcement background and works internet crimes against children, and he's incredible. If you're looking for future guests, he's an awesome one.
Bring him on.
Okay, I'll connect you.
Yeah.
But we like, in lieu of funding, following us, helping get our word out, spreading awareness, sharing us on your socials, asking other people in your network to follow us is always a huge help. Whatever you can do, we're grateful for. We really are. My job doesn't get to exist without people donating. Like it doesn't. And so I couldn't be more grateful for people that donate or follow or share. And right, like my clients who need medical care or need a plane flight for court or need anything like that, those don't happen without donations. So thank you so much for anything that you want to give. And you can Google us, International Protection Alliance, is the full name. And then yeah, we're excited and we're rocking, and we're really excited to see where we end up at the end of the year.
Oh, I'm excited for you. And I'll make sure all those links are in the show notes so
Okay, perfect.
everyone has no excuse to not go and find you and support you in some way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Jacob, it's
seriously.
been it no, well, it's been brilliant having you. It's such an important topic and I really appreciate the work you're doing, the openness about your journey to it and how we can help. So thank you very much for being a guest.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and for everyone that tuned in, thank you. And just yeah, thanks for making it this far. So
Thank you.